What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. My name's Will, and this week got a fantastic episode for you guys. Xander and I are back on the dual hosting grind, and this week we've got a friend of the podcast on. We're talking to Philip Carcia this week. If you are an avid podcast listener, you know that Philip has been on multiple times. He's done a lot of crazy efforts. He's done the single-year grid. I've had him on the podcast before to talk about the single-season White Mountains guide hike that he did. Also, I think we talked at one point about his giant Wachusett days that he does, as well as his 8-day Northeast Ultra 8 effort. So he's done a lot of crazy stuff, but today, I'm having him on the podcast with me and Xander to talk about his most recent project, which was the Quadruple Winter 48. As far as I know, nobody has done a dedicated quadruple round of the New Hampshire 48 in any season before, let alone winter, which is probably the hardest season to do it. And Philip went out and did it this summer, and it's a crazy amount of hiking. It's almost 1,000 miles, well upwards of 300,000 vert. Terrible conditions. I was out there with him on a Carter Marai, or not. It wasn't. We didn't do Marai. It was a Carter Cats traverse, as well as some fun on the Williefield Tom range. It's just a brutal winter. We got a lot of snow this year, relatively early on. So it was tough sledding out there, but he pulled it out. And if you do the math out, 4 rounds of the 48 is 192 mountains, and Philip thought that wasn't enough, so he had enough time left over that he went out and did a Prezi Traverse plus Jackson just to make it an even 200 at the end. So that was pretty awesome. Always stoked to talk to Philip. If you've been listening to the podcast, you know that usually Philip and I do these sort of marathon 3-4 hour long episodes, usually in person at his tiny house. But my schedule is just too crazy right now, so I decided this time around, Xander and I are going to chat with him and do it the old-fashioned way the new-fashioned way on Zoom. So I plan on getting together with Philip later in the spring or in the summer to catch up and have one of our more long conversations. But for now, this is what we got, and I think we made the most of it. I think it was a really good conversation. Xander and I had a lot of fun talking with him. I think we got a lot of great little tidbits out of Philip, and he makes it pretty easy, as you know, but it was a great time. So Philip, thank you so much for coming on. Xander, of course, thank you for co-hosting with me. It's always a pleasure when we get to do that. And before we get to the podcast, let me tell you guys about the sponsor for this week, and that is, of course, Infinite Nutrition. Infinite is a total nutrition powder that you mix right into your water for all of your ultra endurance nutrition and hydration needs. I use Infinite on all my big efforts because it is very customizable and very simple. I know that all I have to do is mix in 1 serving of Infinite with my water and drink 1 serving every single hour, and I'm good to go on both hydration and nutrition. And it's pretty crazy. I've used Infinite as the vast majority of my nutrition now on 2 rounds of the 48, 2 rounds of the long trail, multiple rounds of Bubba's Backyard Ultra, 100-mile wilderness, you name it. If it's been any effort over, 5-6 hours in the last 5 years, I've been using Infinite. So if you want to try them out, they're a great company. Go on over to their website, which is in the show notes, and use code From the Backcountry. That is all one word and no spaces. From the Backcountry, lowercase, and use the code 15% off your order. Includes their custom mixes, includes their high fructose blends, and it's a great company. It's a lot cheaper than something like Morton too. And yeah, I think that's it. So Philip, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you all for listening to the podcast, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks here. All right. Peace. About that.
I was very inspired. I was inspired by the last podcast and just the enthusiasm that was coming out of you, Will, regarding this fondness for seltzer you've developed.
The seltzer is what it's all about, and we're still working on the seltzer sponsorship. If anyone out there knows a sponsor,
Dude, Polar is from Worcester. You should get
Well,
right in there.
Yes.
Northeast
And
proud.
that's why I
I
can't really
mean,
co-sign anything other than Polar because it's a Worcester, it's just like a
sure, sure,
Worcester
sure.
brand. However, I have reached out to them in the past, and the emails tend to get ignored over on that side. I can't pull any like Worcester cred out of the hat and like get a response. So Will, you might have a little bit of a better chance than I in terms of the that Polar sponsorship, baby.
So we'll see. That is what it's all about. It's you made it when you have a seltzer sponsor.
For
That's
sure.
true.
So, all right. Now that we've got that great intro out of the way, we're here to talk about a very specific effort that just went down in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Philip just became the first person ever to do a quadruple single season, I think, in any season. Is that correct?
Hard to tell for sure. But I mean, even if you're kind of working on the grid, that doesn't call for like even
Right.
3 full rounds in a summer
Hmm.
season, or in any season. And even if you're working on like the single year grid, you're not going to need to do more than 3 rounds in any given season. So I think it's safe to assume that this is probably the most amount of 4,000 footers climbed in any season, certainly in a single winter season.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And it's quadruple plus, not
Quadruple.
to be
That's right.
forgotten.
That's right.
Yeah, we did a little extra credit. Like technically, the project ended at 104.16%. So went a little OD, but it was necessary.
Philip didn't take me up on my take for his, because I knew he wanted to get to 200, and my take was that he should do an octuple mucilage. But he didn't bite on it.
That's
For some
crazy,
reason,
man.
a Prezi Traverse is more scenic.
I mean, that late in the game, there needs to be some kind of like visual carrot that you're chasing. There needs to be something to like get you up those extra mountains. And as appealing as an 8 pack of Musalak sounds, yeah, the Prezi plus Jackson it was the
Yeah.
perfect, eight more peaks to get me to an even 200, and just like the greatest ridge in the White Mountains and probably the world. It made sense.
Yep.
It sure did, yeah. Do you want to give like the broad strokes overview of like what you did? I feel like we jumped into just
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
numbers.
Yeah, totally. And I'll give just like a little bit of historical context because I really want to pay tribute to all of these pioneers, all of these OGs who are basically creating the game that we all play, 30 plus years ago. So this winter, the goal was to complete, what Will you've kind of referred to as a quadruple single season. That's the term I used as well. Very, very simple, straightforward concept, 4 complete rounds of the New Hampshire 48 in a single calendar winter season. So I started at like 7 a.m. on December 21st and finished the last full day of winter, March 19th. And if you kind of do the numbers, it's easy to figure out 48 times 4, that's 192 White Mountains 4,000 footers. You're out there in the winter, which is arguably the most extreme time of year to be out in the White Mountains in the high country. And my reach goal was 200 4,000 footers, which is what we were kind of talking about. We first started, an 8 pack of Musalak, or the Presidential Traverse. I wanted to get the 192, and then obviously 200 just felt like a cleaner, just easier to speak number. So when it became clear that I was going to have a little bit of extra time, I got that Prezi plus Jackson and got the even 200. So that was the goal, and that was what I was able to pull off this winter. Very, very briefly, some historical context. This was actually the 30-year anniversary of the first ever single season 48. So more commonly, people are pursuing, just a single season winter, one round of the New Hampshire 48 in a single winter season. And the first time that was ever completed was 30 years ago, the winter of 1994, 95, an individual by the name of Kath Goodwin. There were also two others who were out there with her who completed it in the same season. They were White Mountains peak baggers, New England peak baggers, and they got a bunch of these 48 done early enough in the winter where they started to consider like this idea of getting them all done in a single winter, and that had never been done before at that point. Again, this was 30 years ago. And, very, very different times in terms of the technology, the gear, the logistics, the information, the beta that's out there. But they were able to pull it off and effectively, as I mentioned before, started this game that is very much woven into like the winter hiking culture, winter peak bagging culture in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And there's a little bit more to that story in terms of the historical context and why I took the project on. I'm not sure if you guys want me to speak on that quickly. But I do think that it kind of gives full context as to why I took something like this on in the first place. So 10 years after the first single season winter. So this is the winter of 04, 05, 2004, 2005. Kathy Goodwin, one of the first women to complete it, attempted and completed the first double. So 2 rounds of the White Mountains, or the White Mountain 48 in a single winter season. Almost half a decade later, in the winter of 2010, 2011, I believe, another pioneer, Tim Musket, completed the first triple single season, so 3 rounds of the New Hampshire 48 in a single winter season. And the very interesting sort of tidbit there is that he wanted recognition for having all of those peaks solo. And it came out that his dog had accompanied him on one half of one round, so 24 peaks. And apparently the powers to be, the people sort of like who started this game and overseeing, the folks or the official list of finishers didn't really like that. And so Tim went out to his credit, which is amazing. He went out and completed an additional 24 peaks, those 24 peaks that he had his dog with him, and he did them solo. So he effectively completed a triple, but it was 3.5 rounds in a single winter season. And I mean, that's just like unbelievable to think about when you take into consideration this was 15 years ago. And that's kind of where I step into the story. I had been told about Tim's triple single season, his triple single season plus, several years ago when I first came up to the White Mountains on a full-time basis. And I'm kind of in an interesting position where I have a single season, a double single season, and also completed a triple single season in 3 different winters. The triple was while I was working on my grid, my single year grid. And again, had like always heard of this story of Tim Musket and the 3 rounds and the extra 24 peaks to get, all of them solo. And it was super inspiring to me. And it also felt like it was a story that was slightly unfinished, just because as incredible and mind-blowing as 3.5 rounds in a single winter is, especially 15 years ago, 4 rounds sounds a little bit better, the same way that 200 4,000 footers sounds a little better than 192. And it planted the seed in my brain where the idea of 4 rounds, the idea of taking what Tim did and kind of finishing it or making it more complete, it stayed with me and it's haunted me. And as someone who's done like a double, a single, and a triple, I always knew how much work would be required, how much commitment, the level of willingness that an individual would need to have to like actually lock in and get all those done in a winter season. It just always scared me. It always haunted me. It always intimidated me, but it always felt like something I wanted to take on. So I know that's a little long-winded, but that really kind of gives you some context of what's happened in the White Mountains hiking culture over the last 30 years, how that's kind of woven its way into my life and my hiking resume. And yeah, just like why it felt like something I truly needed to do and truly needed like on my hiking resume in the whites.
Sure. No, I love it. That's great background.
Yeah.
This opens an obvious route of questioning, which is a quintuple single season possible? And should someone try it?
In my head before you said that, I was like, "There's no way that Will's going for this question this early in the, in the podcast." The quintuple, the 5-pack, the White Mountains 5-pack, which is probably what I would refer to it if I were to ever take it on. It just sounds better than quintuple. The White Mountains 5-pack is absolutely doable. When you start to dissect exactly what I did out there, you will realize that there is a lot of room for improvement. First and foremost, like, I had 24 days of either recovery or, days off of recovery or days off for inclement weather. So you just take that 25 days and, it was either brutal or I was exhausted during that time, but you could certainly take less. I mean, I think I took 3 days off for like New Year's, which is insane, and very kind of ballsy that early in the project. But just in terms of like days spent on trail, there's a lot of time, to gain. And also, like, I worked part-time. I live and work at the Notch Hostel in North Woodstock, New Hampshire. Most folks know that. And I worked part-time through the entire winter. I directed a fireside chat series where we have local hikers and outdoor enthusiasts come in and kind of present their story in our hostel. So there were absolutely scenarios where I was, having to prioritize that work over getting out on trail. It wasn't a lot. The Notch is incredibly flexible when it comes to this type of thing. But lastly, in addition to that, like, I'm not an elite athlete. I'm not, I'm not a sponsored athlete. I have some connections with Hoka for shoes and connections with, a company called Virgin Outdoor for some apparel, but I'm not a sponsored athlete. There's no one paying me to do this. I don't have like unlimited resources. There are often like, corners that need to be cut. I'm driving a tiny little Yaris go-kart through the White Mountains. There were days that I couldn't even get on trail just because of the weather that was happening, and it wouldn't be safe for me to drive. So my point is, like, you ask a question like, is 5 possible? Undeniably yes. And I don't know, like, if or when that's going to happen. I'm certainly not interested in going back out there for 5 until 200 is challenged by somebody. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But 5 rounds for sure is absolutely possible, and I'll even take that really quick a step further, because I spent time out there thinking about, okay, is 5 rounds possible? Like, obviously you're just out there thinking like, okay, what really is possible? And it's like, okay, yes, 5 rounds is possible.
I know exactly where you're going with this, and I hate it so much. Are you starting to think about a double single season grid? Is that where you're going with this?
I wasn't. No, I wasn't.
Okay, never mind. Don't plant that idea in your head, please.
Okay, well, what's funny is, you're talking about a double single year grid? Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what's funny is this dude, Hiker Ed, a.k.a. Ed Hawkins, who's like an icon in the White Mountains hiking culture. He's got almost 9 grids. He's like 25 hikes away from his 9th grid. You're talking like 5,000, 4,000 footers. He pulled up to the finish of the quad and just super randomly suggested that to me as like the next project. And we won't get too sidetracked with that, but that's not the direction I was going in. What I spent time thinking about out there is like, what's the summer equivalent of this project? How many rounds could you do in a single summer? And I think if 5's possible in the winter, especially like in a winter that was as rough as the one we just had. I mean, I know I only got 4, but I think, if you had worked some things and had 0 commitments and all the resources you needed, I think, 5 would be possible in the same conditions. What could you do in a single summer? And I think like a 10-pack would be insane, but totally possible. If you look at and at the very least, like an 8-pack for sure. I mean, if you look at the numbers of what I just did for the quad, about 1,000 miles, 995 miles, you climbed, I think, 355,000 feet of vertical. I think you could absolutely bet that you could double that. And when you do that,
oh, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say, just finishing up, is like when you do that and you look at it from just like a numerical standpoint, mileage, vertical, I mean, you're really not doing a whole lot more than a single season White Mountains Guide completion, which was 2,000 miles and about 600,000. So, you know, with this, with an 8-pack, you're looking, I guess, at about 2,000 miles. And if you're going strictly by the numbers that I logged this winter, about 2,000 miles and probably about 700,000 feet of vertical.
Right.
But I think things would even out quite a bit, man, because as you both know, like in the winter out here, you can't just get to all these peaks as efficiently as you would in the summer months. I mean, look at like the Prezzies plus Jackson plus isolation. That's something you can do 10 times in a summer, and you get not 9 of those peaks. You start splitting them up, the 7-pack, you know, Jackson and then isolation, it adds so much more mileage, so much more vertical. That's kind of what I found myself having to do this winter, just because of the conditions and how much snow we got. But you eliminate that stuff and it's just straight up dry, rocky trail. I mean, you can really start doing some damage. And that's when I think like an 8-pack, a 9-pack, or like a 10-pack would be insane. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility.
So,
go ahead, Zach.
Do you think that the 10-pack is achievable for somebody who is like going at it like you were? You know, it's like still working part-time, you know, not totally optimized.
No.
But you think generally from winter to summer, it's like you could potentially go twice the speed.
I would think so. Yep,
Yeah.
I would think so based on my own experiences in the mountains and just like what I know that I can do. Like I know that I can average, just based on previous projects, 22, 23 miles every single day, you know, 6,500 feet every single day. Obviously, you're talking about a little bit higher numbers than that, but at the same rate, the network of the 48 is like much tighter, in a much smaller area than something like the White Mountains Guide. So you're going to save a bunch of time just having to drive up to Canada, down to the Squam Lakes, over to Hanover, over to Maine. And I feel like some of that stuff would really even itself out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking just like quintuple yo-yo of the Diartisma. That's like 2,300 miles, 800,000 vert. Like that's just a hard through hike. I bet you could do that.
But do I want to, Will?
I know.
That is the big question.
That sounds awful.
Yeah. I think that I'd have way more fun. I love this style of getting in the car, you know, having a big ass cooler at the car with a bunch of drinks and a bunch of food, getting back to the car, doing these reps. Which, you know, even doing just a 4-pack, I was incorporating doubles on a lot of these peaks. And it was just, there's something cool about it, man. There's something challenging, but also something very cool about it. Whereas like, I enjoy the long traverses, but it's also just really interesting and a little unconventional to, you know, be going up Moose, turning around, chilling at the car for 15, going back up, or, you know, the same thing with like Cannon Kinsman's or, you know, Tom Field Willie, any of these peaks are like mini traverses that you can double. There's something interesting about that style as well. And I mean, like, you know, you guys know there's like way more efficient ways to get the 48 than a White Mountains Diartisma. You know, it's like,
yeah.
If you got to connect them, obviously that's the link up. But I mean, you're probably talking like, Will, what did you total for your round of the 48 on your supported attempt? Was it like, it was under 2, right?
Oh yeah, no, it was way under 2. It was like 170, 175.
Right. Okay. So I was doing like 230 for every round in the winter.
Yeah.
So
because you got to add so many more on, and you have to get back to your car a lot of the time if you don't have a spot. So
for sure, and like you have to. A lot of people asked this question while I was out there, like, oh, you know, Kerrigan is a great example. Like, okay, if you're doing more than one in a day, like, do you just walk the road, go up to Kerrigan, come down to the summer trailhead, and then
Yeah,
go back
sure.
up? And it's like, no, you got to walk the road every single time as though it's like a single pass. And that just, I mean, I walked, what is that? 16, I guess, like 16 miles of Sawyer River Road like this winter. Like,
Yeah.
Sick.
probably like 20 miles of Haystack Road, or Zealand Road rather,
Dude,
maybe
yeah.
even more than that.
Hail is the one that would kill me. Like Hail is supposed to be such a little gimme mountain, and then in the winter it's just so not.
And the snow blows in on that mountain in such a weird way, where you're
Mm.
literally just like on this slanted slope for like a mile and a half. And we can get into the conditions and what, how this particular winter was very unique, in terms of conditions and weather and whatnot. But yeah, that little mountain didn't give it up easy on a single rep, this season.
Maybe before we get into that, I just want to touch on something. So, like, you said that one of the things that like got you into this was the like unfinished nature of the like 3.5 rounds back in 2010. And I feel like you've set yourself or somebody else up for a similar thing. Like 200 is a clean number, but you did 4 and 1/6, right? Like, and then 240 is super clean. uh, like, I guess,
Ooh, I like I
like,
like where you're going with this.
how do you, how do you feel like this sets? Like, do you think that somebody could take up what you did in a similar fashion to how you treated the 2010 effort?
I mean, I hope so. I think that's kind of the goal, is to like plant seeds. It doesn't even have to be, planting seeds with folks who are in the community yet. Just, this idea that someone somewhere is going to read about this effort and be super inspired. I don't I don't think that like an extra eight feels, and especially the context in which I did the extra eight, I don't necessarily feel like that feels super similar to the 3.5 rounds. Getting 1/2 round into a fourth go at the 48 certainly feels like dude was putting some work in. Dude was definitely looking to, even if it was motivated by this solo superlative that he wanted, dude was definitely looking to, put a significant amount of peaks in, further that winter. And for me, it's like the extra eight. It wasn't necessarily about like, oh my God, let me just see like how many more I can get. It was really almost just like a chef's kiss,
Yeah.
on the top of the project, where it was like, I have no, if I had genuine interest in doing as many over a fourth round as possible, or as many into a fifth round as possible, I could have, there was enough time to probably fit a Prezi and Pemi in, or just swap out the Prezi for the Pemi and get a 12 pack instead of an 8 pack.
Mm.
So it felt like a chef's kiss. It felt like a little bit of a cherry on the top of the project, and it wasn't motivated in this way where I'm trying to just get as deep into a fifth round as possible. That being said, I would be really happy if someone took it that way and took it a little personal and said, okay, this dude went eight more peaks into a fifth round. I'd like to take what he did and bring it to the next level. Get an even 5 pack. I don't think it's. I don't know that it will motivate somebody for the same reason, but I mean, I think it's been very clearly said. It's like, okay, 4+ rounds have been done in the 48. The next step is not 4.5. It's not 205. It's an even 5 pack. And yeah, I hope it inspires somebody, man. Like that's the whole point. I'd love to see this project from the comfort of my couch, the comfort of my tiny house in North Woodstock, and not be obligated to be out there every day.
Yeah, I guess like the 200, it feels like it finished it off for you in the way that you wanted to do it. But I
Mm-hmm.
will say this, for somebody who's watching, like, you open the door, counselor.
Hey,
You know?
let's let's swing that thing open. You know what I mean? Let's swing it open and keep it open because yeah, I love that. I didn't. I guess 200 felt so big to me that the idea of someone being inspired to go another 40 peaks, it wasn't really something that I thought a lot about. But you know, as we talk about it here, of course, like
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, the groundwork has been laid for a fifth round, and again, like I hope that there is somebody out there watching that is terrified by the idea of 5 rounds. I hope that there's somebody out there that is super intimidated and haunted by the idea of 5 rounds. But you know, the seed has been planted, and you know, at some point they'll wake up and say, yeah, I wanna take what he did and bring it to the next level and push this thing forward. And for me personally, above like getting the 4-pack, the 4 rounds in a single season, above having this massive project added to my resume, above all of these like kind words and support that come on the internet, the primary motivating factor is, and probably always will be, to recognize what has been done before by the people that came before me and do what I can now to push that just a little bit further, to pay homage and respect to these individuals that created the game that we play, and to be inspired by their body of work and to take that and push it a little bit forward. And of course, like in doing that, you hope someone else is watching and they're going to do the exact same thing. That's like one of the greatest compliments you can get taking these projects on, is someone seeing it, being moved by it, being haunted by it, and then stepping in and saying, I want to pick up where you left off. That's a very cool idea for me. I'm closing the door literally, but not literally.
One thing I'm interested in is I do want to get to the specifics of like how it went out there, but you know, when I look at your Instagram, it says visual perspectives from the northeastern mountains, filmmaker, photographer, long distance hiker. How do you, like, if you look at a project like this on the surface, it seems very very niche, as in like I'm going to do 4 rounds of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers, and not a ton of people know the history, not a ton of people know what that means, and yet you're able to create this sort of broad appeal with your projects that resonates with a lot of people. And so I'm interested in how you're able to sort of weave a narrative and bring a project that feels hard to, I would imagine at first glance, hard to grasp for a lot of people, and bring it to where people can resonate with it and really engage with it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think first and foremost, on a foundational level, you have to have a willingness to share what you're doing. In this hiking culture, in this running culture, in this mountaineering culture, this outdoor culture, we are expected to be very humble. We're expected to show a lot of humility in terms of what we're doing and how we're doing it. We're expected to, okay, let people know what we're doing, but don't say too much. And for me, as someone who over 20 years ago had a camera in his hand, long before he ever had a foot on the trail, I've just always resonated with that artist energy, that artist mentality. I still consider myself an artist first. And so as an artist, I will always prioritize expressing myself, and expressing myself openly with an audience that is willing to listen. And so again, I think first and foremost, you just have to have a willingness to share. You can't be too concerned about what other people are going to think. You know, I try to pay as much homage to these OGs and these pioneers as I can, but I know this isn't their style. This isn't their brand. They're very quiet. They're not on social media. They don't want a lot of recognition or attention in their directions. And that doesn't necessarily mean I do. What I am willing to say is that I am willing to put these projects out there as openly, as honestly, as consistently as I possibly can, because I want people to be able to see over and over what it is I'm doing. If you don't understand it conceptually right off the bat, I'm going to try to share as much as I can so that these ideas, these concepts, these motivations, these dreams, these objectives are very, very clear. And so people are able to kind of like latch on in that way. I will say, whether you're a peak bagger in the White Mountains or not, just telling somebody, hey, I want to do 48 mountains over 4,000 feet, in northern New Hampshire 4 times this winter, that is something they can kind of grasp from a conceptual level. They may not have any experience, but they can kind of grasp it from a conceptual level. You give them some of the metrics, some of the statistics, they start to understand. So willingness to share first and foremost. Also, I feel like once you are sharing, especially in this sort of niche corner of the endurance world, like you're talking about White Mountains, 4,000 footers, 200 of them in the winter, in the most tumultuous time to be climbing out here. You just like document that and give them the visuals, even if they don't quite understand what you're doing. The videos and the photos kind of sell the story. I mean, like when you're putting up a picture, your friend's getting nearly blown over by 40, 50, 60 mile an hour gusts, and there's spin drifts all around you, and you're out on Mount Kerrigan. Like, I mean, people don't necessarily have to understand like the nitty gritty of what it is you're trying to do, or even like the motivation in terms of why you're trying to do it. It's like those visuals just, for lack of a better term, they just sell, like they get picked up. And even though this is like a very niche project for sure, when you look at like the content that I was generating over the course of these 90 days compared to a lot of the other stuff that I've put up, I mean, it was getting a super, super far reach. People were absolutely viewing by the hundreds of thousands in some cases, and I just believe that is, less to do with the parameters around climbing 48, 4,000 footers in the White Mountains 4 times, and more about just the fact that like we're out there on the edge, pushing in these conditions every day, and that kind of content is highly relatable, even if it's just from like an entertainment standpoint. So willingness to share, plus the quality or the appeal of content. And lastly, I would just say I operate, like, as niche as this stuff is, I'm operating in a place, the White Mountains, that has a very connected community. Like, it's a small, very underrated part of the Northeast, the United States, but there's a lot of people hiking up here. There's millions of people who visit the White Mountains, annually. And the fact that I'm taking 3 months and sharing this content consistently and prioritizing getting online and giving people updates, and then seeing these same people that are commenting on my social media feed, seeing them out in the mountains, allowing them to sort of like actually bear witness. Okay, this dude is like out here really doing it. This is what he's carrying. This is how, he's looking. This is how he's feeling. It's like this full circle component to the whole story. And you're building this up over the course of weeks and weeks and weeks, and people are becoming more and more invested. And they're also seeing you like out on the trail, or they're coming into the hostel and like rubbing shoulders with you. And there's just all of these components sort of combined make for a very sort of special, I don't want to say like phenomenon. I mean, it's just storytelling, right? But it just kind of like makes for this formula where people are able to latch onto the content, start to understand what your goals are, start to understand the concept, and they're able to ride with you for 3 months straight. When you combine all that stuff together, once you exit, you can kind of appreciate like, holy shit, a ton of people were following this. A ton of people were, like rooting for me in a strange way. A ton of people wanted to see me, see this thing through. And I think for a lot of folks, when they're documenting their adventures, or like Will, in your case, it's like, dude, the stuff that you do, you can't be like on social like I am over the course of like, 4 days on the long trail, like doing lives. Like you could have a team that's documenting and putting that stuff up sporadically to give people a real-time view of what you're doing, but like you personally don't have the time to do that. And it's like, those 4 days like count for everything, man. Like you start sharing that stuff after the fact. And I just think, to your point, it's very niche in a lot of ways. And that sort of niche nature of what I'm doing, volume in the White Mountains, in this example, in winter over the course of not days, but weeks and months, and the volume of social media that's going out, it's cool, man. It creates a little story for people to latch onto, and also just like hype people up. Like people are seeing this stuff, and thankfully they're taking more away from it than just a like and a share. They're like working on their own single season. They're working on their own projects. They're getting ready for their own destinations during the summer, and they're seeing what some fool from Worcester out in the hills can do every single day when he just sucks it up and gets out there and doesn't negotiate with himself. And I think a little bit of that rubs off on them, and they start to feel a little bit more empowered. They start to see like, oh shit, okay, like I could do this too, or like if he's doing this, like I could at least do this. And it's cool, man. I'm lucky. The storytelling component, as is super, super, super important for what I do. And that doesn't mean every project will allow for the kind of depth of storytelling that I was able to put out during this project. But it's super important for me.
Yeah. I just have a highly compensated social media manager during my efforts. So, it works out.
I'm super highly compensated.
Yeah, man, you got to get that, get those independent contractors on board and start having them do the social blast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do want to get to the meat of the effort. Maybe talk about a little bit just to start about the I think you've alluded to it once or twice already, but the overall metrics of this thing in terms of the mileage and vert, and then also your approach just in terms of how do you start to pick apart this puzzle with so many mountains to hit.
Cool. I got my spreadsheet here, so I'm going to just riff off a couple important numbers. So it was 200 4,000 footers, 200 White Mountain 4,000 footers in a single winter season. Took me 89 elapsed days to travel the 995 miles. I also climbed 355,000 vertical feet throughout that 955 miles. I just did this tally before I came on the podcast. I completed 126 of the 4,000 footers solo, and I had one or more people with me for 74 of those peaks. And I guess for me, and like I said, like the goal was 192. That was 4 complete rounds. But when I was like looking at my metrics and keeping track of my metrics every day in my spreadsheet, I was basing all the numbers on like 200 peaks. So it was easy for me to understand like, okay, if I'm going to get 200 peaks in, every one peak counts for 0.5%. And
Sure.
That was like, kind of devastating to think about on days where like you literally would just go up Moriah like once and you're like, fuck, it's too cold for me to, stay out here. Or I need to get back to work or whatever. And it's just like, okay, cool. Like drove 2 hours round trip and spent a few hours on trail in a snowy Arctic hell for 0.5% of like the overall goal.
Yeah.
But I wanted a realistic idea of like, where I was in the project and what everything counted for. So, about 1,000 miles, a little over 350,000 feet. I was solo for 126 peaks. I had company for, roughly 74 of the mountains. And in terms of strategy, what I wanted to do was the goal was to get through all of the orphaned peaks in the first half of the winter. And coincidentally, a lot of those were actually close to where I lived in North Woodstock. Mm-hmm. So the idea was to kind of ease into the winter with peaks that were close to where I lived. So there wasn't going to be a lot of travel time. A lot of these peaks, you're talking Moosilauke, you're talking the Hancocks, you're talking Osceolas. A lot of these peaks are very well traveled. So the level of resistance or level of friction in terms of the conditions and snow quality, should have been fairly easy. On a psychological level, I kind of felt like getting through the orphan peaks first, would be super helpful, because of course, like, these are the mountains that you're putting the most amount of miles in for, with like the least amount of return in terms of like percentage moving forward on the project.
Right.
Because there's two ways to look at your status, or your place in the project. You can look at it in terms of number of peaks completed, or, when I started this thing, it became pretty apparent pretty early that I was going to be doing, 900 to 1,000 miles. You can also look at it in terms of the amount of miles that you have completed. And those fluctuate, obviously, based on where you're going. But great example is like, you do a double Musalak, you're out there for like 19 miles, and you're climbing like 5,000 or 6,000 feet, and you're literally only getting 1% of the project done, versus going out on a presidential traverse, where, for 20 miles, a mile more, you're literally getting an 8-pack, and you're getting 4%, you're getting 4% of the peaks done. So I felt like, just psychologically, the orphan peaks were going to be a little bit tougher to digest and move through, just in terms of, putting all that effort in and getting a low reward, as far as the percentage of peaks complete go. The other like major strategy it kind of plays into this is, what I knew for sure is that I wanted to leave the Pemi Loop, the 12 peaks in the Pemi Loop, for the very end if I could. And the reason for that was, those 12 peaks in my mind were the piece of the puzzle that had the most amount of possible combinations when you look at how they're going to be broken down. And I pulled the trigger on a super extended Pemi, a 12 peak Pemi, on New Year's Eve. That was way earlier than I thought I would, but the conditions looked good. They were not so good, but early in the project, you're stoked, you want to swing on stuff. Myself and my buddy Kyle did go for it, but the idea was to leave those peaks for the end. And if I were able to kind of time things out in the last couple of weeks, where I had really good conditions, I was feeling really good, the weather was stable, or at least, somewhat predictable, I could get through those remaining 36 peaks in literally 3 hiking days. But if the worst case scenario surfaced, and the trails and the conditions were really unpredictable or suboptimal, the weather was unsettled, I could still break them down either into 2s or 3s, or worst case scenario 4, and still be able to get out there and hike without committing to like that full 36-mile point to point or loop, if that makes sense. And in terms of the strategy, that's really what I stuck to the entire winter. I wasn't able to really get any more of the Pemi Loop in until like the very end of the winter. I wasn't able to get like the presidential range in until really February. And I guess if you were to talk about, or if I were to mention, a third kind of like strategic point, the presidential traverse, I always said, like, I'm going to get this thing in as early as I possibly can. Number one, because it's some of the toughest hiking. And also, like, when you think about the Prezi, like, the Pemi is big and it's expansive, and you're out there for 36 miles to get those 12 peaks, but a lot of that stuff is under tree line. And like, you're going across Franconia and you're going across the Bonds, but like, you could definitely get through a Pemi in suboptimal weather, versus like the presidential traverse. It's shorter, but like, I just genuinely feel the Prezis are one of the few places in the whites where it's like, if that's all you have left on the project and the weather just didn't cooperate, like, it could shut you down or force you into a scenario that could potentially be like truly deadly, up above tree line and like wildly cold temperatures, zero visibility. And like, the nature of this winter kind of spoke, or how late I had to wait in the winter to get the presidential traverses, kind of spoke to how tumultuous, the season was in general, just because in January and most of February, before I got that first traverse, like, anytime it was clear above tree line, like, literally the winds were so high and it was so cold that it was like, even with clear temperatures, like, you couldn't, it's like -40, -50, -60 with the wind chill. It's like, I don't care if it's clear and I don't care if the trail's a hard pack. Like, I'm not going into a position where the weather could overtake me like that. So getting through the Prezis as soon as possible. But again, had to wait until really like middle to late February to even be able to start swinging on that. So that was kind of the strategy. And if I had to do it again, probably it all worked out, and I'm grateful. I'd probably think long and hard about putting that penny loop on the front end of the season than the back end. I
Mm-hmm.
had no idea that we were going to get as much snow as we did this winter, and eventually, like, we got the conditions we needed to pull another penny loop and break the rest down. But there was so much snow in the lesser traveled sections of the penny loops. You're talking about like from um, the Liberty Springs Junction over to Haystack, from Lafayette over to Garfield, over to Galehead, from South Twin across the Twinway over to like the Bond Cliff Trail. There was so much snow that it was just like really slow going, even when conditions were good, because you were literally up in the trees. I mean, you were up in the
Yeah.
branches, up in the vegetation. There was snow falling on you, even if it wasn't snowing. There was a lot of pushing, a lot of pulling, a lot of stopping. Like, yo, where is the trail? It was just super, super slow going, and we got through it. And obviously, like, there was no way that like I was gonna I was gonna let those last whatever 24 peaks dictate the success or failure of the project. But I think if I had kind of like just bitten those off at the beginning of the season and just kind of pushed a little bit harder right off the bat, it would have been bold. But I think I probably would have gotten through that stuff earlier and like with less effort than I ended up doing, at the end of the project, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the things that you kind of circled around that I find most like admirable about this project is that because of the changing conditions in the whites in the winter, there's like so much choice involved day to day in what you're going
Yes,
to do and what you're going to force yourself to do. And I would
for
think
sure.
that it'd be really easy to kind of like just get behind the skis a little bit and just by making what you thought were smart choices at the time. Did you have any moments like that where you were like, I'm behind pace, even though I feel like I'm making the right decisions?
Yeah, it's funny, man. Like, people would hit me up wanting to hike, and they'd like ask me about my schedule as though like I had a calendar for the entire winter that just said Moosalok, Moosalok, Tecumseh, Galehead, Twins. Like, I would respond. I'd be like, dude, I have no idea where I'm going to be next Friday or like this Friday. I have, as much strategy as I had going into this winter, I also knew that the weather and the conditions would dictate absolutely everything. It would dictate where I went and when I went there and for how long I stayed. And in response to your question, like, was there any moment where I was out there being like, you know what, this like wasn't the best choice for the day? Absolutely. But I also have to back that up by saying I don't know that like in those moments like being somewhere else would have been any better,
Sure.
because we had such a cold winter that you could go a week, 2 weeks without significant snowfall. You could have dozens of people going out on the exact same trail, and it was just so cold that the snow never consolidated, and it was so consistently blustery that half these trails were blown back in to some degree, even the next day going back out on the same trail. And so like hail was a perfect one. It was like that's halfway through the season is when I started um, breaking down Mount Hale, and that was the first time that I had my snowshoes on consistently. And I remember like, my second to last day or my last day out there thinking, shit, this has taken so long, and I've had to do hail, on 4 separate days. I should have been going out here. I should have been going out there. This would have been so much faster. Come back here when this is like better broken out, or just a little bit easier to travel. And then you move on to the next mountain. I think I went to Mariah after that, and it's like, oh shit, it's the same thing over here. And then you're like, all right, I want to get away from Mariah. I think more people have like gone over here. And then you go there and it's like, oh shit, it's the same thing over here again, because it was just so cold. The snow was not consolidating, and this stuff was getting blown back in. And it all kind of just like equaled itself out, where it's like, okay, this is really rough, but I'm not convinced that it's going to be any better somewhere else. And just to kind of elaborate on that briefly, the one moment where I thought maybe I had kind of fucked the project up was when I went back to the Pemi toward the end of the season. And I had already gotten a full 12 peak Pemi in the bag. So I had, I think 36 peaks left in the Pemi. And I thought, you know what, I'm not gonna attempt a Prezi Traverse on this next one. I'm gonna break this next one down, and if anything, lay tracks around the lesser traveled, portion, so that I can give myself a little bit of a leg up when I am doing a full, Prezi Traverse. I'll at least have something there to follow. So on the day of, it's like I'm not out there for as long. And I hadn't been in the Pemi in quite some time, and went up Liberty Springs Trail, did an out and back from Liberty to Flume, and put the snowshoes on, and went over from the Liberty Springs Junction to Little Haystack, which is like not really traveled in the winter that much. And it was fucked up, man. Like it was just, there was so much snow back there and no signs of anyone. When I say so much snow, again, it's not an exaggeration. You're up in the trees, you're in the branches. There are no blazes. Like, this is the AT. Like, you can't find any white blazes. It's freezing, and you're trying to navigate, and you're like having to stop, pull out Gaia, and it's like you take 10, 12 steps, and because the snow is up so high, it's really hard to differentiate like what direction the trail is moving. It takes a ton of time. Again, like, you're pushing through this stuff, and the physicality of the hiking in snowshoes as well, like, you're putting in so much effort to get the miles. And it took me, not an exaggeration, like about 3 hours to get across that 1.8 miles, like on that, when I revisited the Pemi for the first time toward the end of the project. And I was like, oh man, I might have to break this thing down, in 3 different ways or 4 different ways for like these remaining 36 peaks. And when you look at the implications of that, you're going from literally 3 hiking days to 9, like in terms of like the days that you need on trail. And you look at, what else you have left, and you look at the allotted time left before the end of the season. That's when I started to get a little bit nervous. Like, oh shit, like if I do have to break this down 2 more times after this, it's going to be really, really close. And that just fills you with anxiety, and you're exhausted, and you're just like, my God, like, so many times this winter, it was not like, the mileage was never the issue. Like, when you look at just the metrics, like, there is no day on the project that was intimidating just based on the metrics. 36 miles and 12,000 feet was the biggest day that I did. And that was one of these point-to-point Pemis. But it's the conditions of the trail. It's the temperature. It's the cold. It's the snowshoes and the extra food, like, and the weight you had to carry. Like, the last Pemi loop I did, there's like, I got a video up, like, going by the Garfield Spring, like there was no water there. My boy just happened to post hole down to his crotch into some water. And then we were taking our snowshoes off and digging out this like trench just to be able to, get in there and get some water, almost halfway through the Pemi loop. And, it was slow going. It was difficult. And there were definitely moments where I was like, I didn't play this right. You know what I mean? Like, I thought that if I waited until March, we could capture those 10 glory days, those 14 glory days at the end of the season where it's starting to warm up more. The sun is warmer. We're getting that freeze at night. It doesn't matter if people have been, going through these lesser traveled parts of the trail network. Things will kind of like warm, refreeze, solidify. And yeah, we never really got those conditions. It was like sloppy, choppy, warmish, heavy snow up in the trees, pushing through stuff, really fighting for every mile.
Yeah, that's gritty.
It's gritty. It's giving me hot traverse PTSD. It's awful.
I was thinking about you out there, Will. I was like, damn, like, I wonder if Will was like hating life this much when he was going through the winter hard traverse. But you did it the right way, man. You went at the very beginning of the season, and we were out there around the same time when Andrew and I were doing the winter 48 record last season. And I think I felt like, oh man, we're gonna get, if I just wait, if I'm patient, I'm gonna get similar conditions to that, where the snow is like not that high. It's pretty consolidated. It's maybe not perfect, but you can at least move well.
Hmm.
And it wasn't anything like that, man. But of course, when you come out the other side, and we can talk about it, and when you're trying to process like what you went through and like what you think you're kind of capable of now, um, it feels, it's obviously much more rewarding that you weren't let off the hook in that way. Like this whole winter, I questioned, like, is this ever going to be easy? And you're also kind of like wishing for it to get a little bit easier. And then once you actually make it through and it didn't, you're just like, oh my God, okay. Like, I'm capable of way more than I thought I was, or at least, you're capable of something that you feel like is truly difficult and truly tested you every single day for 3 months.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. Sorry, Xander, go ahead.
I guess this is a more meta question, but as you were talking about the difficulties of the winter conditions, I was like, why the heck, like, did all of these people like decide that they want to do, a triple in the winter? Like, I don't. Maybe it's just because like your content was like front of mind this winter, but I was like, I feel like the summer would be way more fun to do this. But it sounds like there's a lot of people who have just like decided, yep, I'm gonna do it the really, really, really hard way in the winter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's undoubtedly the mountains of the Northeast become a completely different beast in the winter months. And I think it's pretty given for like most people, especially those that consider themselves not necessarily just hikers, but a little bit more of an athlete. I think it's a given that most folks could get through a single season 48, and probably if they had enough free time, like people could get through a double single season 48, like in the summer months, what have you. But for whatever reason, back 30 years ago, these three folks decided that this was a superlative worth chasing. And again, like my hat's off to them. Like I met Kath Goodwin twice on the trail this winter, and it was really, really cool to talk to her. She was out doing a commemorative like 30-year anniversary single season winter. So like one of the first people in the winter of 94, 95 to establish this thing was out 30 years later doing an anniversary hike, and it was cool to meet her and cool to chop it up with her. And I think like from her perspective, this was something that hadn't been done before. These were individuals that loved the peak bagging culture, the early peak bagging culture in the White Mountains. And they got to a point that winter where they kind of felt like they had so many peaks already that it might be feasible to get through the entire list. And again, this is like before social media. This is before New England trail conditions. This is before Gaia. This is before microspikes. This is before like any kind of like modern snowshoe equipment that we have. This is also before the masses and masses of people that we have in the White Mountains in the winter were ever out on trail. Like, I mean, there's just like so fewer people to be out there breaking trail during this time. It's really unbelievable when you think about what they did. And then I think like anything, especially in the Northeast, especially in the White Mountains culture, you just see people come along afterwards wanting to build off of what has already been done. And at first it was Kathy herself saying, hey, I want to do 2 rounds. And then it was Tim saying, hey, I want to do 3, and then being forced into 3.5. And then you have Philip Carcia, 15 years later on his own sort of like, crazy mission, being super inspired by these pioneers, these OGs, and very much in the same spirit wanted to take what's been done and push it forward. But yes, I mean, I think the idea is that the White Mountains in winter are just a completely different entity. They're a completely different beast. And what may seem like reasonable or manageable goals in the summer become a very, very different animal in the winter. And so that appeal, that winter appeal is something that I think resonates with a lot of people, It's the same reason like Will wanted that winter hut to hut, you know what I mean? It's like a lot of folks can go through and do the hut to hut in summer. You try to do that connection in the winter, it's a completely different experience. mentally, physically, psychologically, spiritually. You try to do 4 rounds of the New Hampshire 48 in a summer, dude, that's a vacation. That'd be like one of the chillest endurance projects ever. It'd be like challenging, but it's kind of a given. You put it in the context of a single winter and things get very, very different. Again, the spiritual nature, the psychological nature, the physical nature of the experience, it reads like a completely different book, if that makes sense.
To be clear, I wanted the Winter Hut Traverse record because I don't respect Jack as an athlete, and I want to do something that's just out of his league. So I
mean,
felt
who
like that
does,
was
man?
Yeah, exactly.
I love you, Jack.
I don't. What was your what was your favorite moment or mountain from the effort?
You know what was really cool this winter was I was doubling up a lot of these peaks. So that was something I hadn't really done previously in the White Mountains. I didn't ever really have a need to do that, just in terms of the projects that I've taken on. And even though the numbers on these doubles weren't extravagant, just the novelty and also I guess like the challenge of returning to your car, refueling, changing some layers out, turning around and going back up. It was really cool. There was a lot of appeal to it. So a lot of my favorite experiences on the project had to do with the doubling up of certain mountains. The first one that comes to mind is I did a double Owl's Head one day. So like 16 miles round trip for one summit, about 32 round trip for two summits. And I've always loved that mountain personally. There's just like a strange appeal and a strange like affection that I have for Owl's Head. But the idea of doing two in the winter in a single day was just like, it calls for a different psychology. And that was just like an amazing hike to get through, just all the way out to Owl's Head, being in the middle of nowhere, getting back to Lincoln Woods, chilling for a few minutes, and then going back out with your homie and running off that mountain for a second time in the middle of a snowstorm. Like, it was really, really cool. You walk away from that day just feeling like, okay, again, I only got 1% of the project done, but you know how much work you put in, and you know that the miles need to get done either way, and you just kind of feel like, all right, cool, I didn't just cop out at one. I went for two, and I went for two on Owl's Head, and that peak's not easy. So, like, we're good. We're still locked in. We're still focused. We're still dialed. Another really cool double day was a day that I did double Cannon Kinsman. So up from the tram parking lot to Cannon, over the Cannonballs to both Kinsmans, down the backside of the Kinsmans on the Mount Kinsman Trail to Route 116. Had a Yeti cooler stashed in the woods there, a bunch of drinks, a bunch of food. I had my sleeping bag in there, so I kind of just like cocooned up halfway through this day, fed myself, like, got some liquids down, and then went all the way back up and over. And like, you're looking at numbers like in the mid 20s with almost 10,000 feet of elevation, and you're back at your car and you're like, wow, okay, I just got 3%, 6 mountains, and basically have the same or similar numbers of a penny loop on the Cannon and Kinsmans. There's like a novelty to that was just like very interesting. And again, you drive home and you're like, damn, okay, cool. Like that's amazing. Like, I know I can knock that out. So a lot of my favorite days were the doubles. I would say behind that, all the time in the presidentials, like, as always, well, not as always, but all of the time that I had in the presidentials was just so dreamy. And I was starting to take on the prezzies really on the back end of the project. And I was taking on the prezzies in a way where, like, I was really spontaneously riding the weather. And there were days that I went out for a prezzy and was on social media, on my Instagram, on my Facebook, putting up stories, going live, like, yo, I had to pull the trigger on a prezzy today. The conditions came together last minute. I have the time. I don't have a ride lined up at the end of this thing. Is there anybody out there who can kind of, scoop me up and grab me? And, that's a little nerve wracking, but also like very nostalgic and very, this was what I was doing when I was working on the single year grid the first few months, when I literally had just moved to New Hampshire and had like no connections, had like no friends or contacts that I could call up and hit. Like, I would just have to pull the trigger on a Prezi Traverse with no ride lined up on the other end, and just hope that like the kindness of the people who followed me or the community that surrounded me would kind of shine through and, something would work itself out. And I found myself in that same position this year. And people always came through and it was like amazing. But the days in the Prezzies were incredible. Like, there was a sequence toward the end where I didn't do back-to-back Prezzies, but I did Prezi Traverse, and then I think I did like Katz Carter's Traverse, and then did another Prezi Traverse. Like the volume was significant and it was in a short period of time. But again, like this kind of leads back to this idea where people were asking me, where are you going to be next Tuesday? Where are you going to be? It's like, there were days where it's like all of a sudden I didn't know I was going to do 2.5 Prezi Traverses that week, but it's like the conditions came together. I felt good. The hype was real. The willingness was real, and it was on the back end of the project. And, it just kind of like went for it and it all worked out. And I remember after I finished that last Prezi Traverse, well, I didn't know if it was the last Prezi Traverse. Once I got through that fourth round, I didn't realize that I'd go and do a fifth round. But once I got through that fourth round and had all the Prezi peaks out of the way and Jackson, I remember writing on like my Strava caption and social media that night, like, this feels like a palpable turning point in the project. Like, yeah, I still got a long way to go. And yeah, I still got to deal with the whole puzzle that is the Pemigewasset Wilderness, but all of the Prezi peaks are done. This is some of the most arduous and exposed hiking of the entire project. Like, this is a turning point, and now the project is turning from what I kind of saw as possible to what became more probable, if anything. And I wasn't out of the woods yet, but dude, after having been on project for so long and going through the conditions that I had for so long at that point, and even knowing that I still had a long way to go, but coming out the other side of all those Prezi peaks, I was just gassed up. Like, I just was like, dude, this has to happen. Like, it has to happen. Like, at this point, like, you've done so much work. I had done a ton of work before then, but at this point, you've gotten through the Prezzies. You've like come this far. Like, this has to happen. And like that resolve just, even though it never really got easier, the resolve throughout the whole winter just started getting a little bit stronger, a little bit stronger, a little bit stronger, a little bit stronger, to the point where I would say, like, when I started the project, I probably started feeling like I was committed to seeing if I was committed. Like, I was going through the motions. I knew what the goal was, but I really needed to feel out if this was my time to get this. I know that sounds a little strange. I had all the planning, all the prep, all the money, everything done. Everyone was on the same page. My work, my friends, everybody knew what was happening. But I guess in my heart, I started with this idea of like, I'm committed to seeing how committed I was. And once I nailed that first that first penny loop on New Year's Eve, that commitment just like shot through the roof. And then of course, like, I was already very committed once I finished the Prezi, but even at that point, it was like, wow, this is not just possible, it's probable now. You're going to do it unless there is some wild, unforeseen situation or scenario that surfaces. You're going to do it. You just got to stay locked in. So when you talk about like the best moments, they were really like moments like with the best views and stuff for sure. And the Prezi represented that, but they were also just the moments where I was experiencing like a high level of affirmation in terms of like what I'm doing. Like, oh dude, see, like, this is proof positive. Like, you're here, you're committed, you're willing, you can do these miles, you can thread the needle through the weather. And that was always just a good day, man. Any of those days were always just good days.
I remember maybe about halfway through the project, I came out and did a little Willie Field Tom action with you. And one of the things you said that really stuck with me was, this can't be the single season guide. Like, I can't do this. I'm not doing this project again. How do you feel like your experience with the guide book and like redoing a project multiple times influenced your commitment to getting this thing done in 1 year, and not because I also feel like maybe like the second year of the guide, I remember you saying something similar. And so I don't discount that if it hadn't worked out this year, you would have sat on it for a month and then been like, okay, I have to do it again. But, the drive to not do it again was really high. And do you think that's informed by your experience with the guide, or do you think that there was something particular about this project that made you say, I'm not doing this again?
Both, actually, to be perfectly honest with you. The guidebook project, the single season guidebook project, definitely left me with a certain amount of PTSD, for lack of a better description, just because, again, I found out what it was like firsthand to commit 90 days of your life hiking 20 plus miles a day, living out of your car, to a project, and watching it slip out of your hands, not once but twice, and watching it slip out of your hands when at a certain point in the project you thought that you were going to actually be able to get it. So just living through those 3 seasons of the White Mountains Guide, it just gave me so much information in terms of like who I want to be and need to be as a hiker and an athlete, and who I can't afford to be as a hiker and as an athlete. Um, and so when you step back into another single season project in the winter, you're carrying that with you. And you're thinking about what it would be like the whole time, where if you just, if this project slipped through your hands, what it would be like to have to go back the following winter and go through all this stuff. So yes, on a foundational level, my experience on the guidebook just showed me you have to be tighter, you have to be more focused, you have to be super locked in, you have to be willing and committed to do what you need to do every single day, and not just like bet on this idea that you can make things up later, or bet on this idea that you're strong enough to put in a ton of volume in an emergency situation. And so I was carrying those lessons with me like the entire time. But also the fact that I would have to be going out again in the winter reinforced like that belief system, that psychology, because in the summer, even though the 3 guidebook projects were really exhausting and required a lot of time and a lot of money. I mean, like, just you're out there in shorts, no shirt, water bottle, cruising around, beautiful light, like kind of no worries except for like putting in the volume. Like it could be disguised as a good time, if you're like willing to sort of buy into like working your ass off every single day in the mountains is a good time, and I do buy into that. So the idea of repeating that, my point is the idea of repeating the guidebook, 2 or 3 times, although it was suboptimal, it felt like less of a weight than it would be to have to go out next winter, not know how much snow we're going to get, not know, like how cold it's going to be, and have to restart this project over, be out in the cold all day long. And that was like another component to the project, and kind of contributed to the urgency of like making sure I lock this in on the first try. It's like we take this for granted, and we disassociate from the experience in a way where we kind of forget this. But most days that I was out this winter, you could absolutely describe the weather as being deadly. Like the weather had every capacity to take my life on any given day out there this winter. Whether that was between just the cold, the wind chill, the snow accumulation, the conditions on the road. I mean, I thought a lot about the people who've lost their lives in the White Mountains, doing way, way, way less than what I was trying to do. And so that starts to factor into your brain and into the way you see the project evolving. If you were to have to go back out the next season, it's like you're not just going out in running shoes and shorts and no shirt and a water bottle and like beautiful evening and morning light. You're going out in conditions that have the capacity to take your life at any given moment. And it already felt like I was kind of pushing my luck on certain days out there this season, to have to like fall short publicly, reset, re-strategize, and spend the whole year with a chip on my shoulder leading up to next winter, just kind of knowing that I'm going back into the abyss. I just didn't want to do it if I didn't have to do it. And that was certainly an incentive to keep a spreadsheet updated every single night, know exactly where I was in the project, make sure that I wasn't unnecessarily exhausting myself where, I might be able to go out and do 1 or 2 big days, but then I would need to take a bunch of extra days off. I wasn't spreading myself too thin, to the point where, like in the last week or two, it slips through my hands. I mean, that I did not want to become that person again, man. Like, I know the person that I would have become if I fell short on this project. It would have been the version of Philip Carcia that has a chip on his shoulder, the version of Philip Carcia that's getting hyper competitive, the version of Philip Carcia that's like kind of saying some like wild and unhinged shit. And the kind of person that just is like focused on this one singular goal to the point where like my friendships, my personal relationships are getting tried and tested, and you step off into the abyss again with no guarantee of success. I was really trying to avoid that. I'm really grateful that I was able to avoid that, and I'm really grateful that, like, if in the future at any point I'm stepping back into this project, it's going to be because I want to, and because someone has challenged the superlative, and now I'm feeling called to take it to the next level. It will not be because I know what my potential is, but I didn't reach it out there. Like, it's just, I don't want to play that game anymore, man.
Sure. As Finn Melanson would say, that was a very clippable moment.
Ooh. Get a couple short form clips.
I was going to say, you'll see that on the YouTube shortly.
Yes. But I love that question, man. There's a lot of nuance there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It was just a combination of knowing what it was like to let your dreams slip through your hands. And also like knowing that the conditions you'd have to put yourself back into are just they're not a good time, man. I mean, you were out there with me, bro. We didn't stop. You were slamming your water bottle up against a tree to get your frozen infinite slushy down, like down the hatch, and we're not stopping, and we're talking about like, do we need snowshoes? It's just a different beast.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. What do you feel like was like we talked about the best moments or best mountains? What do you feel like was the worst condition wise, like emotionally? Like, what was the hardest thing you had to get through?
Cat's Carters were always challenging. Will was out there with me.
Yeah.
On one of those reps, Will pulled the short straw, and he was out there on one of those reps. And actually, that was the easiest traverse that I had that winter. So like both Wildcat Mountains down into Carter Notch, and then up Carter Dome and across Middle and South. And it's about 15 miles, but you climb quite a bit. It's a steep up from 16 to the Wildcats, and then a steep down to Carter Notch, and then another steep up. And that range, I stand by this, and I don't have any like scientific data to back this up. I'm sure the folks like at Mount Washington would probably know way better, but I believe that range collects some of the most snow in the entire White Mountains. And I think a lot of it has to do with like what kind of blows off of Mount Washington in the presidentials and ends up landing in Carter Notch along the Carter Range. But the snow there was so deep, and the days that I was out there were so cold, and I took a lot of that stuff on in the second half of the project. My legs were just like super, super heavy. There was one of the darkest moments that I had on the whole project was my last Wildcat Carter traverse on a very, very cold day where my car got stuck. I was going to be spotted, leave my car at 19 Mile and have someone bring me over to the Wildcat parking lot. I had got my car stuck in that parking lot right off the bat. Didn't want to like leave it there for when I returned, so we had to like dig it out. Missed the start time to get up the Wildcat Mountain. Like if you get to the top of Wildcat before 8 o'clock in the morning in the winter, like you can go up the Polecat Trail, basically on the ski slopes of Wildcat, versus taking the Appalachian Trail up and over, and they'll kick you off if you're on that mountain like after 8 o'clock when the lifts open. So missed my opportunity to spot my car, and then basically had to do that traverse in the opposite direction, which leaves you at the end of your day going down into Carter Notch from Carter Dome, and then having to climb like all the way back up Wildcats. And on that day, man, the snow was so deep and it was so cold, and I just felt so worked that I got to that cutoff at Carter Notch Hut, and I probably spent like half an hour there just like staring up at Wildcat AB and just like, I don't want to fucking do this. Like, it was just, I was worked. I was super worked, and the miles don't come for free. You know what I mean? You're in snowshoes. Like, this is a steep incline. There hasn't been anybody up there to break trail. Like, you just know that you're not going to be able to cruise up this and like run out in an hour or two. Like, I was out there for multiple hours after that. And that was definitely just one of the most exhausting, tiring days. But again, like the best days out there also came when you're kind of reaffirming your place in the project and reaffirming how much you quote unquote deserve to be out there. And on that particular day, because I was going in the opposite direction and because of that snafu in the morning, I got to the summit of Wildcat D, like right in the half light of evening. And I was like, fuck it, I'm butt sliding down these black diamonds. I'm not like slow jogging down the polecat trail. There's no like, there's none of these machines out, these groomers out. I just got on my ass and I was whipping down that mountain as like Wildcat is getting closer and closer into view. And that was also the day that I finished out the Wildcats and the Carters. So emotionally, spiritually, physically, it was ridiculous. It was exhausting, and it like, getting back into Carter Notch that day, I was definitely in a low point. But then, like, on the other side is this like amazing sledding experience and like just the beautiful half light of Pinkham Notch and Wildcat below, and you're cleaning up these peaks, and you get back to your car, and even with as tough of a day as you've had out there is this like, again, this affirmation, this glimmer of hope, like, yo, that doesn't really matter too much as long as you just keep putting in the reps in, as long as you keep knocking out these 0.5% days, these 1% days, these, 2% days. And that was basically the story of the whole winter. It was consistency over intensity, always.
Yeah.
That's clippable too, bro.
That's
one. Holy shit.
I remember.
I got nuggets late in the game.
Yeah, I remember our, we did it on January 29th, so it's still pretty early on in the season.
Okay.
And I do distinctly remember being like, this is a lot of snow for January 29th.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And
so
it only continued.
Yeah, I want the listeners to know that us not doing a 3 to 4 hour mega episode is completely on my ridiculous schedule right now, and it makes me sad. But we'll all catch up probably later in the spring or summer to
yeah, dude.
To hang out more and drink brews as we do for our other episodes.
Most definitely.
But as we start to wind down a little bit here, I am wondering if you have anything that you want to share about what's next in the pantheon of Philip Carcia efforts. Xander's probably upset that I just butchered the use of that word, but it's okay.
I want that diaretisma, man. I want that. Okay. I want that.
Can I talk about it? Can I talk about it on here? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. It up.
So now that it's out here, I've been talking to Xander about this, and I wanted to wait until you were done your project to post this, and I can cut all this out. But my pitch here is that the ethos of like the unsupported diaretisma is really carrying all your shit. It's not the fastest known time definition of you must not see anyone, you must do all this crap. So my pitch would be, for the sake of White Mountains culture, because of how epic this would be, I think you and Drummond should start at the same time, race the same direction, and allow spectators along the way. No pacers, no support, but people can come, spectate what's going on. And if FKT doesn't take that as unsupported, then I will never claim the unsupported record if one of you beats it. Like, in the spirit of it, like, whoever breaks it will have the record, even though it might say supported on FKT.com. That's my pick. I think it would be such great theater for you and Drummond to race it in a self-powered, no support fashion, but allow the community to see what's happening. I think it would be so epic.
Yeah, I think that the the idea of racing the Diretissima is very, 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 very appealing. I think it's very interesting. I think it's cutting edge. I think we're going to start seeing more of this happening, not even necessarily in the whites, but just across the country. This idea of two people going after the same route in an FKT fashion, regardless of style, at the same time. In this case, we could do a coin toss on the summit of Mount Washington. Me, Special Forces, aka Andrew Drummond, Will Peterson, Squally Pup right there to just have a third party sort of observing.
Right, of
And
course.
we determine the direction by coin toss. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, Will. That's kind of the background of I think where you're coming from, but that's super super appealing to me, man. And Andrew Drummond is somebody that I look up to quite a bit. I'm a fan of his body of work. Actually, a lot of people don't realize this, but when he first got that record, I was working at a media arts workshop in upstate New York, doing paperwork in a basement, and saw him drop this like visual trailer for what he was about to do. And it fucked me up, man. Like, it was so cool. I was like, the root, the creative behind it, the way that he was going to share it, it absolutely started to get my own, my own wheels turning. So Andrew Drummond, aka Special Forces, which is what his trail name is definitely somebody that I look up to quite a bit. And the idea of going out on this route and not necessarily attempting it in like a strictly FKT official kind of unsupported capacity, it is super super appealing. I think that you could switch Andrew Drummond out and myself with any number of people, but I absolutely want that White Mountain Diretissima. I want the unsupported superlative. I think that people would be able to appreciate and enjoy a quote unquote race of this route, even if they weren't able to spectate live. Even if they were literally just given the Garmin information, the spot information, and be able to track where each of us was at one time. I think it would be absolutely incredible for the White Mountain hiking, running, peak bagging, endurance culture. I think it would be a gift to the community. But until that's signed on the dotted line, of course, I'm speaking more along the lines of a more traditional unsupported attempt, where I am carrying my own stuff, where I, am not having the outside influence or help from anybody, where I'm not picking up resupplies. And I mean, Will, I've been super inspired by your body of work. I've been super inspired by what you've done in the 48, both in terms of the supported and unsupported efforts. I've completed the Diretissima on 5 separate occasions. I've completed the first and only known White Mountains Diretissima yo-yo. I don't have the unsupported superlative yet, amongst any of those 5 traverses. And this route just means a lot to me. I've got a lot of time spent on this route, a lot of dreams realized and a lot of dreams destroyed on this route. And in the same way that when you were just coming up on the scene and dipping your toes into this shit, the same way that you wanted to take what has already been done and push it just a little bit forward, I would love to be able to do the same thing with the unsupported Diretissima. Just take what you did, push it a little bit further, kind of keep the standard local. You know what I mean? Keep it in the hands of the White Mountains heads, and really set somebody else up for the opportunity to take what I did and push it further. And I don't know, man. There's been a lot of conversation over the last years. You're constantly kind of dropping little predictions, and you're kind of, always dropping these carrots, talking about like how the time is beatable and how like this is the year. I absolutely believe like this is the last 6 months that the record stands where it's at. There's just too many old heads and too many young bloods that are hungry for it, that have hit me up and say, yo, I'm going to go for it. Yo, I'm training for it. Yo, this is the year. Yo, I think I could do that, this, that, what have you. I think like in 6 months from now, the time will be lowered. And I think all of these folks who are going to go out for it, like, we're just going to see where everybody winds up,
I tend to think so too. There's been too many people that are taking it seriously this year, I think, for it to not go down. Which
You're
I'm
about to get
stoked for.
torched, man. You're about to get torched.
I know but if it doesn't fall this year, then I'm going to be invincible. I'm going to be Andrew Thompson up in this piece.
Well, I guess I also want to avoid the version of Will Peterson that like the future version of Will Peterson that like wakes up and he's just like, you know what? I'm going to redo this one and take this shit forever. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to compete with that Will Peterson.
Sure.
I'd like to jump on the project now, where you've had the record for all this time, and right now you don't have anything else to prove on the route, and there's a lot of hungry people in the community that are looking at this thing and that want to swing on it, and I'd like to be one of them. A dream scenario would be to go out at the same time with somebody like Andrew Drummond, you know what I mean? With somebody like, I'm not going to name a bunch of names, but someone who's like contributed a significant amount to the hiking and running culture in the White Mountains. Someone who lives, breathes, dreams White Mountains endurance. Someone who's proven himself on the 48. Someone who is really kind of like,
is Bill taking himself the Diartisma? I'm just kidding.
Bill.
He's not.
I mean, like, but even Bill. I mean, maybe that seems a little bit. Well, it's not. It might seem a little lopsided. Obviously, Bill Tidd's a lot older than me than Andrew Drummond, but Bill Tidd is an elite athlete with elite capabilities. Who's holds the current supported time on the New Hampshire 48. Like, I think the idea of just two White Mountain heads who have a deep love and commitment to these peaks and the hiking and running and endurance culture that surrounds them. I think two White Mountain heads of that caliber, regardless of what happens, going head to head on this route would be something that the White Mountains have never seen, that the community up here has never seen. And I think it would be a special, special, special moment in the history of what's been done up here. But I'm also like very happy to, just be in that lone wolf mode and head out with a bag myself and just be, chasing the ghost of Will Peterson, exclusively, so to speak. But yeah, the Diartisma, man, that's what's next for me. And I don't really want to share like when or how or what the strategy is, but
totally.
This route means a lot. Both of you guys, man, have hyped me up for years, and Will in this context, especially, bro, like, it's just very cool to see what you've done, and it'd be fucking rad to, follow in your footsteps on a fucking route that just like means the world,
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, no, I do not pose the race scenario as a backdoor way to preserve my technical effort on FKT.
Of course not.
Because
not.
if anyone / you decides to do it in the traditional FKT way, I would like totally respect that too. I just bring up the other one as like a sick for the community scenario, and again,
don't you think it would be so sick?
It would be so sick.
It'd be super fun to watch.
And if that happened, like, again, like still carrying all your stuff, no pacers, just like racing head to head, and plus or minus spectators. Like even if FKT didn't take that as unsupported for their website, like I would never claim to still have that record anymore. Like in the community spirit, which I think is more important than the FKT website, it would be whoever said it. But I also respect the wanting the technical FKT unsupported. Like I respect that too. I'm a slave to their website as well.
Very, very quick, just out of curiosity, like, let's say that, I mean, like when you say head to head, do you envision it being we both start at the same place, or we're both
Yes,
starting at
Yeah.
opposite? Okay, so you
I
want the same
think
place.
because I think the problem with flipping a coin and doing it opposite directions is that whoever goes, quote unquote southbound is gonna, whether or not there's a disadvantage to doing that, there's a perceived disadvantage. And so I think both parties, as long as both parties think that's the better way to do it, I think starting at Moose Lock, starting at the exact same time, and just racing head to head, I think that's incredible theater. And it's a lot easier
Yeah.
to tell. It's a lot easier to tell like where you are in comparison to each other going the same direction.
How do we decide start time? Are you
Uh,
like are you at the Beaverbrook Trailhead like sparking up a cigarette at a random hour? Like
yeah, I
via
mean,
Barkley style, and like we don't know, or do we do that coin toss with Squally and Will on the summit of Washington, and the
I
winner
mean,
decides, because that's the
uh,
whole strategy, of course, like to the effort. It's like, when do you start? For me, I come alive in the nighttime. So like
sure,
my strategy is like very early start. You know what I mean? Potentially like overnight start. A lot of people want to wake up naturally and start, with something that might feel a little bit more manageable or conventional.
sure. I mean, I would say first I would say you guys figure it out between the two of you. But then if you can't figure it out between the two of you, then I just decide a random time
Oh shit. Okay. I let listen.
by
Let's
smoking
go.
cigs.
Yeah, man, I love it. I love anything new, anything different, anything unconventional. Like, me, as far as like the whole official FKT website thing.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
yeah,
not as invested in that scene, I think, as a lot of people are.
yeah,
But I just want to do things that like hype people up, man, and move the culture forward and give people a little bit of something to hold on to, a little bit of something to inspire them. And racing an absolute fucking legend like Andrew Drummond, like Special Forces on the Diartissima, would be super dope. Racing any of these guys out here who are deeply committed to the whites, have a ton of experience, want to knock off the Diartissima, would be super dope. And also just kind of having a very solo lone wolf experience where it's just me against the ghost of Will Peterson is also very, very appealing. But the whole point is, I'd like an opportunity to truly, truly, truly give myself in a full and complete way to the White Mountains Diartissima, and just very respectfully and humbly, take what you did, Will, so many years ago when you started your run up here, and inch it forward just a little bit.
for sure.
I'll be jacked up
Yeah,
to watch you do it. It'll be super cool.
yeah,
Hell
me
yeah.
Yes.
too. And just
Appreciate
last
it,
thing for
guys.
everyone out there, I do not know for sure. I do not know for sure if Andrew Drummond is even doing a Diartissima this summer. I don't mean to blow him up. So if he's not, then erase all of this. But
I think Andrew is hungry for it, man. I think
I think so
Andrew
too.
is probably like looking, I think Andrew's probably got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder since last summer. I think Andrew's been plotting and scheming about how he can come back stronger and prove himself on this route. I think that dude has a lot more to give to this route. But yeah,
Yep. All right. It's been a pleasure. Thank you guys both for your time. Xander, you're
thank you,
contractually
guys.
obligated to be here. Um, you know, is what it is.
Yeah, it's
Philip,
fun to
thank you
chat,
so
guys.
much for absolutely, and we'll have a longer chat at some point here this spring and summer, and
Cool, man.
good
Yeah,
luck
this has
with
been
everything
great.
going forward.
You too, man. I can't wait to see both of your guys' years. Seriously, like following along just
Thanks.
keeps me hyped up as well. So, let's get locked in, baby.